The body temperatures of both lizard and mouse of the same body size respond differently to changes in ambient temperature. Temperature regulation in body posture and orientation of the wings to the sun can invertebrates markedly affect the body temperature of basking insects. As previously noted, environmental temperature is critical in limiting the distribution of all animals and in controlling metabolic reactions. Many invertebrates have relatively low metabolic rates and have no thermoregulatory mechanisms. Thus, they passively conform to the temperature of their external environment. These invertebrates are termed thermoconformers. Evidence indicates that some higher invertebrates can directly sense differences in environmental temperatures. However, specific receptors are either absent or unidentified. What zoologists do know is that many arthropods, such as insects, crustaceans, and the horseshoe crab limulus, can sense thermal variation. For example, ticks of warm-blooded vertebrates can sense the warmth of a nearby meal and drop on the vertebrate host. Many arthropods have unique mechanisms for surviving temperature extremes. For example, temperate zone insects avoid freezing by reducing the water content in their tissues as winter approaches. Other insects can produce glycerol or other glycoproteins that act as an antifreeze. Some moths and bumblebees warm up prior to flight by shivering contractions of their thoracic flight muscles. Most large, flying insects have evolved a mechanism to prevent overheating during flight. Blood circulating through the flight muscles carries heat from the thorax to the abdomen, which gets rid of the heat, much as coolant circulating through an automobile engine passes through the radiator. Certain cicadas Diceroprocta apache that live in the Sonoran Desert have independently evolved the complete repertoire of evaporative cooling mechanisms that vertebrates use. When threatened with overheating, these cicadas extract water from their blood and transport it through large ducts to the surface of their body, where it passes through sweat pores and evaporates. In other words, these insects can sweat. For example, perching dragonflies and butterflies can regulate their radiation heat gain by postural adjustments. To prevent overheating, many ground-dwelling arthropods, tenebrio beetles, locusts, scorpions raise their bodies as high off the ground as possible to minimize heat gain from the ground. Some caterpillars and locusts orient with reference to both the sun and wind to vary both radiation heat gain and convective heat loss. Some desert-dwelling beetles can exude waxes from thousands of tiny pores on their cuticle. These wax blooms prevent dehydration and also are an extra barrier against the desert sun. Color has a significant effect on thermoregulation since 50% of the radiant energy from the sun is in the visible spectrum. A black surface reflects less radiant energy than a white surface. Thus, many black beetles may be more active earlier in the day because they absorb more radiation and heat faster. Conversely, white beetles are more active in the hotter parts of the day because they absorb less heat. The previous examples of invertebrate temperature regulation give clues to how thermoregulation may have evolved in invertebrates. The endothermic temperature regulation of active insects apparently evolved because locomotion produced sufficient metabolic heat that thermoregulatory strategies could evolve. An increased locomotor metabolism could well have preceded the evolution of thermoregulation in vertebrates. Temperature regulation in fishes. The temperature of the surrounding water determines the body temperature of most fishes. Fishes that live in extremely cold water have antifreeze materials in their blood. Polyalcohols, e.g., sorbitol, glycerol, or water-soluble peptides and glycopeptides lower the freezing point of blood plasma and other body fluids. These fishes also have proteins or protein sugar compounds that stunt the growth of ice crystals that begin to form. These. Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur 929. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Adaptations enable these fishes to stay flexible and swim freely in a supercooled state, i.e., at a temperature below the normal freezing temperature of a solution. Some active fishes maintain a core temperature significantly above the temperature of the water. Bluefin tuna and the great white shark have major blood vessels just under the skin. Branches deliver blood to the deeper, powerful, red swimming muscles, where smaller vessels are arranged in a countercurrent heat exchanger called the reed-mobile miraculous net, figure 3. The heat that these red muscles generate is not lost because it is transferred in the reed mobile from venous blood passing outward to cold arterial blood passing inward from the body surface. This arrangement of blood vessels enhances vigorous activity by keeping the swimming muscles several degrees warmer than the tissue near the surface of the fish. This system has been adapted for these fishes. Their muscular contractions can have 4 times as much power as those of similar muscles in fishes with cooler bodies. Thus, they can swim faster and range more widely through various depths in search of prey than can other predatory fishes more limited to given water depths and temperatures. Underscore. Figure 3 thermoregulation in large, active fishes. In the bluefin tuna, the reed mobile of arteries and veins acts as a countercurrent exchange system that helps reduce the loss of body heat. The cross-section through the body shows that the temperature is highest around the red swimming muscles. Temperature regulation in amphibians and reptiles. Animals, such as amphibians and reptiles, that have air rather than water as a surrounding medium face marked daily and seasonal temperature changes. Most of these animals are ectotherms. They derive heat from their environment, and their body temperatures vary with external temperatures. Most amphibians have difficulty in controlling body heat because they produce little of it metabolically and rapidly lose most of it from their body surfaces. However, as previously noted, behavioral adaptations enable them to maintain their body temperature within a homeostatic range most of the time. Amphibians have an additional red muscle, white musky thermoregulatory problem because they must exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide across their skin surface, and this moisture layer acts as a natural evaporative cooling system. This problem of heat loss through evaporation limits the habitats and activities of amphibians to warm, moist areas. Some amphibians, such as bullfrogs, can vary the amount of mucus they secrete from their body surface, a physiological response that helps regulate evaporative cooling. Reptiles have dry rather than moist skin, which reduces the loss of body heat through evaporative cooling of the skin. They also have an expandable rib cage, which allows for more powerful and efficient ventilation. Reptiles are almost completely ectothermic. They have a low metabolic rate and warm themselves by behavioral adaptations. In addition, some of the more sophisticated regulatory mechanisms found in mammals are first found in reptiles. For example, diving reptiles, e.g., sea turtles, sea snakes conserve body heat by routing blood through circulatory shunts into the center of the body. These animals can also increase heat production in response to the hormones thyroxine and epinephrine. In addition, tortoises and land turtles can cool themselves through salivating and frothing at the mouth, urinating on the back legs, moistening the eyes, and panting. Temperature regulation in birds and mammals. Birds and mammals are the most active and behaviorally complex vertebrates. They can live in habitats all over the earth because they are homeothermic endotherms. They can maintain body temperatures between 35 and 42 degrees Celsius with metabolic heat. Various cooling mechanisms prevent excessive warming in birds. Because they have no sweat glands, birds can't lose heat through evaporative cooling. Some species have a highly vascularized pouch, gular pouch, in their throat that they can flutter, a process called gular flutter, to increase evaporation from the respiratory system. Some birds possess mechanisms for preventing heat loss. Feathers are excellent insulators for the body, especially downy-type feathers that trap a layer of air next to the body to reduce heat loss from the skin, figure 4a. This mechanism explains why goose down is such an excellent insulator and is used in outdoor vests and coats for protection from extreme cold. Aquatic species, who lose heat from their legs and feet, have peripheral countercurrent heat exchange vessels called the reed mobile in their legs to reduce heat loss, figure 4b. Mammals that live in cold regions, such as the Arctic fox and barren ground caribou, also have these exchange vessels in their extremities, e.g., legs, tails, ears, nose. Animals in hot climates, such as jackrabbits, have mechanisms, e.g., large ears to rid the body of excess heat. Thick pelts and a thick layer of insulating fat called blubber just under the skin help marine animals, such as seals and whales, to maintain a body temperature of around 36 to 38 degrees Celsius in the tail and flippers, which have no blubber. A countercurrent system of arteries and veins helps minimize heat loss. 100 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Venus arterial. Low blood. 30. A thick layer of down feathers keeps these chinstrap penguins, Pygoscelis antarctica, warm. Their covering of short, stiff feathers interlocks to trap air, forming the ornithological equivalent of a diver's suit. B the countercurrent heat exchanger in a bird foot. Some aquatic birds, such as this duck, possess countercurrent systems of arteries and veins, reed mobile, in their legs that reduce heat loss. The arteries carry warm blood down the legs to warm the cooler blood in the veins, so that the heat is carried back to the body rather than lost through the feet that are in contact with a cold surface. Birds and mammals also use behavioral mechanisms to cope with external temperature changes. Like ectotherms, they sun themselves or seek shade as the temperature fluctuates. Many animals huddle to keep warm, others share burrows for protection from temperature extremes. Migration to warm climates and hibernation enable many different birds and mammals to survive the harsh winter months. Others, such as the desert camel, have a multitude of evolutionary adaptations for surviving in some of the hottest and driest climates on Earth. Heat production in birds and mammals. In endotherms, heat generation can warm the body as it dissipates throughout tissues and organs. Birds and mammals can generate heat thermogenesis by muscle contraction, at-base pump enzymes, oxidation of fatty acids in brown fat, and other metabolic processes. Every time a muscle cell contracts, the actin and myosin filaments sliding over each other and the hydrolysis of ATP molecules generate heat. Both voluntary muscular work, e.g., running, flying, jumping, and involuntary muscular work, e.g., shivering, generate heat. Heat generation by shivering is called shivering. Thermogenesis. Birds and mammals have a unique capacity to generate heat by using specific enzymes of ancient evolutionary origin, the at-base pump enzymes in the plasma membranes of most cells. When the body cools, the thyroid gland releases the hormone thyroxine. Thyroxine increases the permeability of many cells to sodium, Na, ions, which leak into the cells. The at-base pump quickly pumps these ions out. In the process, ATP is hydrolyzed, releasing heat energy. The hormonal triggering of heat production is called non-shivering. Thermogenesis. Brown fat is a specialized type of fat found in newborn mammals, in mammals that live in cold climates, and in mammals that hibernate. Figure 5. The brown color of this fat comes from a large number of mitochondria with their iron-containing cytochromes. Deposits of brown fat are beneath the ribs and in the shoulders. A large amount of heat is produced when brown fat cells oxidize fatty acids, because little ATP is made. Blood flowing past brown fat is heated and contributes to warming the body. A brown fat. Warm blood. B. Figure 5. Brown fat. Many mammals, such as this fat, have a diaphyseal tissue called brown fat between the shoulder blades. The area of brown fat is much warmer than the rest of the body. Blood flowing through the brown fat is warmed. The basal metabolic rate of birds and mammals is high and also produces heat as an inadvertent but useful by-product. In amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Specialized cells in the hypothalamus of the brain control thermoregulation. The two hypothalamic thermoregulatory areas are the heating center and the cooling center. The heating center controls vasoconstriction of superficial blood vessels, erection of hair and fur, and shivering or non-shivering thermogenesis. The cooling center controls vasodilation of blood vessels, sweating, and panting. Overall, feedback mechanisms with the hypothalamus acting as a thermostat trigger either the heating or cooling of the body and thereby control body temperature. Figure 6. Specialized neuronal receptors in the skin and other parts of the body sense temperature changes. Warm neuronal receptors excite the cooling center and inhibit the heating center. Cold neuronal receptors have the opposite effects. Warmer blood. During the winter, various endotherms, e.g., bats, woodchucks, chipmunks, ground squirrels, go into hibernation. L-hiberna, winter. During hibernation, the metabolic rate slows, as do the heart and breathing rates. Mammals prepare for hibernation by building up fat reserves and growing long winter pelts. All hibernating animals have brown fat. Decreasing day length stimulates both increased fat deposition and fur growth. Another physiological state characterized by slow metabolism and inactivity is estivation, L. estivus, summer, which allows certain mammals to survive long. Institute for Advanced Studies, Job for 101. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Periods of elevated temperature and diminished water supplies. Some animals, such as badgers, bears, opossums, raccoons, and skunks, enter a state of prolonged sleep in the winter, since their body temperature remains near normal. This is not true hibernation. Changes in environmental body blood. Temperature. Thermoreceptors, thermoreceptors. Found inside, skin the body. / closing parenthesis. Brain == hypothalamus. Exclamation mark. Shivering vasoconstriction increases or basal metabolic sweating cools thermogenesis. Sympathetic or decreases rate increases the body inhibition, generates vasodilation organic or decreases retains heat parasympathetic metabolism. LL tilde, either heat generation or conservation. L. Blood temperature. H. Stress and adaptation. Stress is the consequence of the failure to adapt to change, specifically the inability to respond appropriately to emotional or physical threats to the organism, whether actual or imagined. Common stress symptoms include irritability, muscular tension, inability to concentrate, and a variety of physical reactions, such as headaches and accelerated heart rate. The term stress was first used by the endocrinologist Hans Selye in the 1930s to identify physiological responses in laboratory animals. He later broadened and popularized the concept to include the perceptions and responses of humans trying to adapt to the challenges of everyday life. Stress, in Selye's terminology, refers to the reaction of the organism, and stressor to the perceived threat. Stress in certain circumstances may be experienced positively. Eustress, for example, can be an adaptive response prompting the activation of internal resources to meet challenges and achieve goals. Models of stress. General adaptation syndrome. Hans Selye researched the effects of stress on rats and other animals by exposing them to unpleasant or harmful stimuli. He found that all animals presented a very similar series of reactions, broken into 3 stages. He describes this universal response to the stressors as the general adaptation syndrome, or GAS, in 1936. Alarm. This one's the first stage. When the threat or stressor is identified or realized, the body's stress response is a state of alarm. During this stage, adrenaline will be produced in order to bring about the fight or flight response. There is also some activation of the HPA axis, producing cortisol. Resistance. This is the second stage. If the stressor persists, it becomes necessary to attempt some means of coping with the stress. Although the body begins to try to adapt to the strains or demands of the environment, the body cannot keep this up indefinitely, so its resources are gradually depleted. Exhaustion. This is the third stage. In the final stage in the GAS model, all the body's resources are eventually depleted and the body is unable to maintain normal function. At this point, the initial autonomic nervous system symptoms may reappear: sweating, raised heart rate, etc. If stage 3 is extended, long-term damage may result as the capacity of glands, especially the adrenal gland, and the immune system is exhausted and function is impaired, resulting in decompensation. The result can manifest itself in obvious illnesses such as ulcers, depression, trouble with the digestive system, or even cardiovascular problems, along with other mental illnesses. Lazarus. Richard Lazarus published in 1974 a model dividing stress into eustress and distress. Where stress enhances function, physical or mental, such as through strength training or challenging work, it may be considered eustress. Persistent stress that is not resolved through coping or adaptation, deemed distress, may lead to anxiety or withdrawal, depression behavior. The difference between experiences which result in eustress or distress is determined by the disparity between an experience, real or imagined personal expectations, and resources to cope with the stress. Alarming experiences, either real or imagined, can trigger a stress response. Therefore, Lazarus's model argues that cognitive processes of appraisal are central in determining whether a situation is potentially threatening or harmful. Zanes. Robert B. Zanes, 1984, somewhat in opposition to the Lazarus model of stress, argued that emotional reactions occur before cognitive reactions, and in fact, may be at odds with cognitive responses. This belief was consonant with the previous James Lange hypothesis, 1890, 1922, which held that the body's emotional reaction to stress occurred prior to and resulted in conscious responses. The debate has underscored the existence of 2 modes of reactivity, one conscious and under volitional control, and the other automatic and uncontrollable. Scholars such as Aldwin have argued for a simultaneous, parallel processing approach rather than a sequential neurological processing model where emotions come first followed by cognition, or vice versa. Neurochemistry and physiology. The neurochemistry of the stress response is now believed to be well understood, although much remains to be discovered about how the components of this system interact with one another, in the brain and throughout in the body. In response to a stressor, corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, and arginine vasopressin, ADP, are secreted into the hypophyseal portal system and activate neurons of the paraventricular nuclei, PVN, of the hypothalamus. The locus ceruleus and other noradrenergic cell groups of the adrenal medulla and pons, collectively known as the LCNE system, also become active and use brain epinephrine to execute autonomic and neuroendocrine responses, serving as a global alarm system. The autonomic nervous system provides a rapid response to stress commonly known as the fight or flight response, engaging the sympathetic nervous system and withdrawing the parasympathetic nervous system, thereby enacting cardiovascular, respiratory, gastrointestinal, renal, and endocrine changes. The so-called hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis HPA, a major part of the neuroendocrine system involving the interactions of the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands, is also activated by release of CRH and ADP. This results in release of Institute for Advanced Studies, Job for 103. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Adrenocorticotropic hormone ACTH from the pituitary into the general bloodstream, which results in secretion of cortisol and other glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex. These corticoids involve the whole body in the organism's response to stress and ultimately contribute to the termination of the response via inhibitory feedback. Stress can significantly affect many of the body's immune systems, as can an individual's perceptions of and reactions to stress. The term psychoneuroimmunology is used to describe the interactions between the mental state, nervous and immune systems, as well as research on the interconnections of these systems. Chronic stress has also been shown to impair developmental growth in children by lowering the pituitary gland's production of growth hormone, as in children associated with a home environment involving serious marital discord, alcoholism, or child abuse. Common sources of stress. Chronic stress has also been shown to impair developmental growth in children by lowering the pituitary gland's production of growth hormone, as in children associated with a home environment involving serious marital discord, alcoholism, or child abuse. Common sources of stress. Both negative and positive stressors can lead to stress. Some common categories and examples of stressors include equals sensory, pain, bright light. Equals life events, birth and deaths, marriage, and divorce. Equals responsibilities, lack of money. Unemployment equals JLLNS, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder equals work, study, exams, project deadlines, and group projects equals personal relationships, conflict, deception. Breakup equals lifestyle, heavy drinking, insufficient sleep equals environmental, lack of control over environmental circumstances, such as food, housing, health, freedom, or mobility. Equals social, struggles with conspecific individuals and social defeat can be potent sources of chronic stresses. Adverse experiences during development, e.g. prenatal exposure to maternal stress, poor attachment histories, sexual abuse 14, are thought to contribute to deficits in the maturity of an individual's stress response systems. One evaluation of the different stresses in people's lives is the Holmes and Rahe stress scale. RESIS Ta NCD. TO. Adaptation to stress. Responses to stress include adaptation, psychological coping such as stress management, anxiety, and depression. Over the long term, distress can lead to diminished health or illness. To avoid this, stress must be managed. History and usage. The term stress had none of its current general senses before the 1950s. As a semi-psychological term referring to hardship or coercion, it dated from the 14th century. It is a form of the Middle English distress, derived via Old French from the Latin stringer. To draw tight, it had long been in use in physics to refer to the internal distribution of a force exerted on a material body, resulting in strain. In the 1920s and 30s, the term was occasionally being used in psychological circles to refer to a mental strain or unwelcome happening, and by advocates of holistic medicine to refer to a harmful environmental agent that could cause illness. Walter Cannon used it in 1934 to refer to external factors that disrupted what he called homeostasis. But a new scientific usage developed out of Hans Sale's reports of his laboratory experiments in the 1930s. Selye started to use the term to refer not just to the agent but to the state of the organism as it responded and adapted to the environment. His theories of a universal non-specific stress response attracted great interest and contention in academic physiology, and he undertook extensive research programs and publication efforts. However, while the work attracted continued support from advocates of psychosomatic medicine, many in experimental physiology concluded that his concepts were too vague and unmeasurable. During the 1950s, Selye turned away from the laboratory to promote his concepts through popular books and lectures tours. The U.S. military became a key center of stress research, attempting to understand and reduce combat neurosis and psychiatric casualties. Sale wrote for both non-academic physicians and, in an international bestseller titled Stress of Life, for the general public. A broad biopsychosocial concept of stress and adaptation offered the promise of helping everyone achieve health and happiness by successfully responding to changing global challenges and the problems of modern civilization. He coined the term eustress for positive stress, by contrast to distress. He argued that all people have a natural urge and need to work for their own benefit, a message that found favor with industrialists and governments. He also coined the term stressor to refer to the causative event or stimulus, as opposed to the resulting state of stress. From the late 1960s, Sale's concept started to be taken up by academic psychologists who sought to quantify life stress by scoring significant life events, and a large amount of research was undertaken to examine links between stress and disease of all kinds. By the late 1970s, stress had become the medical area of greatest concern to the general population, and more basic research was called for to better address the issue. There was renewed laboratory research into the neuroendocrine, molecular, and immunological bases of 104 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Stress, conceived as a useful heuristic not necessarily tied to Sale's original hypotheses. By the 1990s, stress had become an integral part of modern scientific understanding in all areas of physiology and human functioning, and one of the great metaphors of Western life. Focus grew on stress in certain settings, such as workplace stress. Stress management techniques were developed. Its psychological uses are frequently metaphorical rather than literal, used as a catch-all for perceived difficulties in life. It also became a euphemism, a way of referring to problems and eliciting sympathy without being explicitly confessional, just stressed out. It covers a huge range of phenomena from mild irritation to the kind of severe problems that might result in a real breakdown of health. In popular usage, almost any event or situation between these extremes could be described as stressful. The most extreme events and reactions may elicit the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. Biology of the stress response. Normally, when a person is in a serene, unstimulated state, the firing of neurons in the locus ceruleus is minimal. A novel stimulus, which could include a perception of danger or an environmental stressor such as elevated sound levels or over-illumination, once perceived, is relayed from the sensory cortex of the brain through the hypothalamus to the brainstem. That route of signaling increases the rate of noradrenergic activity in the locus ceruleus, and the person becomes alert and attentive to the environment. Similarly, an abundance of catecholamines and neuroreceptor sites facilitates reliance on spontaneous or intuitive behaviors often related to combat or escape. If a stimulus is perceived as a threat, a more intense and prolonged discharge of the locus ceruleus activates the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. This activation is associated with specific physiological actions in the system, both directly and indirectly through the release of epinephrine, adrenaline, and to a lesser extent norepinephrine from the medulla of the adrenal glands. The release is triggered by acetylcholine released from preganglionic sympathetic nerves. The other major factor in the acute stress response is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Physiology of the stress response. These catecholamine hormones facilitate immediate physical reactions associated with the preparation for violent muscular action. These include the following: equals acceleration of heart and lung action equals inhibition of stomach and intestinal action equals general effect on the sphincters of the body equals constriction of blood vessels in many parts of the body equals liberation of nutrients for muscular action equals dilation of blood vessels for muscles equals inhibition of lacrimal gland responsible for tear production and salivation equals dilation of pupil equals relaxation of bladder equals inhibition of erection equals auditory exclusion, loss of hearing equals tunnel vision, loss of peripheral vision. Psychology of the stress response. A typical example of the stress response is a grazing zebra, calmly maintaining homeostasis. If the zebra sees a lion closing in for the kill, the stress response is activated. The escape requires intense muscular effort, supported by all of the body systems. The sympathetic nervous system's activation provides for these needs. A similar example involving fight is of a cat about to be attacked by a dog. The cat shows accelerated heartbeat, piloerection, hair standing on end, normally for conservation of heat, and pupil dilation, all signs of sympathetic arousal. Though Cannon, who first proposed the idea of fight or flight, provided considerable evidence of these responses in various animals, it subsequently became apparent that his theory of response was too simplistic. Animals respond to threats in many complex ways. Rats, for instance, try to escape when threatened, but will fight when cornered. Some animals stand perfectly still so that predators will not see them. Others have more exotic self-protection methods. Some species of fish change color swiftly to camouflage themselves. These responses are triggered by the sympathetic nervous system, but in order to fit the model of fight or flight, the idea of flight must be broadened to include escaping capture in either a physical way or in a sensory way. Thus, flight can be disappearing to another location or just disappearing in place. And often both fight and flight are combined in a given situation. The fight or flight actions also have polarity. The individual can fight or fly against or away from something that is threatening, such as a hungry lion, or fight or fly for or towards something that is needed, such as the safety of the shore of a raging river. Fight or flight stress response. A threat from another animal does not always result in immediate fight or flight. There may be a period of heightened awareness, during which each animal interprets behavioral signals from the other. Signs such as tailing, piloerection, immobility, sounds, and body language communicate the status and intentions of each animal. There may be a sort of negotiation, after which fight or flight may ensue, but which might also result in playing, mating, or nothing at all. An example of this is kittens playing. Each kitten shows the signs of sympathetic arousal, but they never inflict real damage. Behavioral manifestations of fight or flight. In prehistoric times when the fight or flight response evolved, fight was manifested in aggressive, combative behavior and flight was manifested by fleeing potentially threatening situations, such as being confronted by a predator. In current times, these responses persist, but fight and flight responses have assumed a wider range of behaviors. For example, the fight response may be manifested in angry, argumentative behavior, and the flight response may be manifested through social withdrawal, substance abuse, and even television viewing. Institute for Advanced Studies, Job 105. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Males and females tend to deal with stressful situations differently. Males are more likely to respond to an emergency situation with aggression, fight, while females are more likely to flee, flight, and turn to others for help. During stressful times, a mother is especially likely to show protective responses toward her offspring and affiliate with others for shared social responses to threat. Negative effects of the stress response in humans. Although the emergency measure of the stress response is undoubtedly both vital and valuable, it can also be disruptive and damaging. In most modern situations, humans rarely encounter emergencies that require physical effort, yet our biology still provides for them. Thus we may find our stress response activated in situations where physical action is inappropriate. This activation takes a toll on both our bodies and our minds. Also, simple stresses that can be acted upon quickly are more easily overcome, allowing the body to return to homeostasis. But with the more complex stresses of modern societies, with many factors and individuals involved, the danger may seem unavoidable and stress may continue indefinitely, which ends up compromising the system rather than helping the system. Disruption of the sexual response and the digestive system are common negative results. Diarrhea, constipation, and difficulty maintaining sexual arousal are typical examples. These are functions which are controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system and therefore suppressed by sympathetic arousal. Prolonged stress responses may result in chronic suppression of the immune system, leaving the sufferer vulnerable to infection by bacteria and viruses. Repeated stress responses can be caused not only by real threats, but also by mental disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, in which the individual shows a stress response when remembering a past trauma, and panic disorder, in which the stress response is activated apparently by nothing. Adaptation. An adaptation is a characteristic of an organism that has been favored by natural selection and increases the fitness of its possessor. The concept is central to biology, particularly in evolutionary biology. The Oxford Dictionary of Science defines adaptation as any change in the structure or functioning of an organism that makes it better suited to its environment. Adaptation is a change in living organisms that allow them to live successfully in an environment. Adaptations enable living organisms to cope with environmental stresses and pressures. Adaptations can be structural, behavioral, or physiological. Structural adaptations are special body parts of an organism that help it to survive in its natural habitat, e.g., skin color, shape, body covering. Behavioral adaptations are special ways a particular organism behaves to survive in its natural habitat, e.g., phototropism. Physiological adaptations are systems present in an organism that allow it to perform certain biochemical reactions, e.g., making venom, secreting slime, homeostasis. Adaptations are traits that have been selected by natural selection. The underlying genetic basis for the adaptive trait did not arise as a consequence of the environment. The genetic variant pre-existed and was subsequently selected because it provided the bearer of that variant some advantage. The first experimental evidence of the pre-existing nature of genetic variants was provided by Luria and Delbruck, who developed fluctuation analysis, a method to show the random fluctuation of pre-existing genetic changes that conferred resistance to antibiotics by the bacterium Escherichia coli. While many traits have obvious adaptive purposes, it is worthwhile to point out that many traits are not adaptive. That once, there is no obvious reason scientists can divine for the presence of a certain trait. This situation is common and there are many causes. The utility of a trait is lost and hence does not now appear adaptive. The utility of a trait is unknown. The trait is a consequence of another trait that is adaptive, the Spandrel idea. This observation underscores two other important points. Genetic variants arise randomly and hence traits can appear randomly, and that because the environment for all living things is constantly in flux, the utility of adaptations will naturally ebb and flow. To survive and reproduce, all living organisms must adjust to conditions imposed on them by their environments. An organism's environment includes everything impinging upon it, as well as everything that is affected by that organism. Conformity between an organism and its environment constitutes what biologists call adaptation. Biotic and abiotic environments. Plants and animals have adapted to their environments genetically and by means of physiological, behavioral, or developmental flexibility, including both instinctive behavior and learning. Adaptation has many dimensions in that most organisms must conform simultaneously to numerous different aspects of their environments. Adaptation involves coping not only with the physical, abiotic environment, light, dark, temperature, water, wind, but also with the complex biotic environment, other organisms such as mates, competitors, parasites, predators, and escape tactics of prey. Conflicting demands of these various environmental components often require that an organism compromise in its adaptations to each. Conformity to any given dimension requires a certain amount of energy that is then no longer available for other adaptations. The presence of predators, for example, may require that an animal be wary, which in turn is likely to reduce its feeding efficiency and hence its competitive ability. For a small bird, trees are an important part of its environment. They offer vital shade during the heat of a hot summer day, places to forage for insects, safety from ground-dwelling predators, and safe places to build nests and raise chicks. Blades of grass or hairs used to line a bird's nest are also important components of a bird's environment. During the dangerous night, a bird copes with nocturnal predators such as raccoons by sleeping. 106 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Perched on a small twig high above the ground, while gleaning tiny insects from tree leaves during the day, a bird remains alert for diurnal predators like hawks. Many birds cope with changing seasonal conditions by migrating to warmer places at lower latitudes where there is more food. Over eons of time, natural selection has molded birds to make them effective at escaping from the predictable dire consequences of winter, a time of high mortality. Birds that did not successfully evade winter's icy clutches died without leaving any surviving offspring, whereas those that migrated survived to pass on their genes. Natural selection has endowed birds with a built-in biological clock, which they compare against day length, effectively giving them a built-in calendar. Changing day length affects a bird's pituitary gland, causing it to secrete hormones that control eating behavior. Short autumn days elicit a wanderlust, ultimately leading to migratory behavior. Experiments with migrating birds in planetary have shown that tiny bird brains have been hardwired so that they contain a map of the stars. Indeed, natural selection invented celestial navigation. Factors that affect adaptation. Organisms can conform to and cope with a highly predictable environment relatively easily, even when it changes in a regular way, as long as the changes are not too extreme. Adaptation to an unpredictable environment is usually more difficult. Adapting to extremely erratic environments may even prove impossible. Many organisms have evolved dormant stages that allow them to survive unfavorable periods, both predictable and unpredictable. Brine shrimp in deserts and annual plants everywhere are good examples. Brine shrimp eggs survive for years in the salty crust of dry desert lakes. When a rare desert rain fills one of these lakes, the eggs hatch, the shrimp grow rapidly to adults, and they produce many eggs. Some plant seeds known to be many centuries old are still viable and have been germinated. Very small undirected changes in the physical environment can sometimes improve the level of adaptation between an organism and its environment, but large changes are almost always detrimental. Changes in the environment that reduce overall adaptation are collectively termed the deterioration of environment. Such changes cause directional selection resulting in accommodation to the new environment, or adaptation. Changes in biotic environments, such as the hunting efficiency of an organism's predator, are usually directed and typically reduce the level of adaptation. Every individual is simultaneously a member of a population, a species, and a community. Therefore, it must be adapted to cope with each and must be considered in that context. An individual's fitness, its ability to perpetuate itself as measured by its reproductive success, is greatly influenced by its status within its own population. An individual might be a resident or a vagrant, mated or unmated, or high or low in a pecking order, all factors that strongly affect its fitness. Any given individual's fitness is also influenced by various interspecific associations of its species and especially by the particular community in which it finds itself embedded. Organisms that are not suitably adapted to their environment will either have to move out of the habitat or die out. The term die out in the context of adaptation simply means that the death rate over the entire species population gene pool exceeds the birth rate for a long enough period for the species to disappear. Due to individual phenotypic plasticity, individuals will be more or less successful. The opposite is selection, which in this context means that the birth rate of those carrying the adaptive trait and hence the underlying genetic variant exceeds over time the birth rate of those that do not carry the adaptive trait. A counter-adaptation is an adaptation that has evolved due to the selective pressure of another adaptation. This occurs in an evolutionary arms race, where a new adaptation giving one species an advantage is countered by the appearance and spread of a new feature that reduces the effectiveness of the first adaptation. Adaptation is quite a varied subject, and there are many main and basic types of adaptation. These include color, e.g., mating, camouflage behavioral, e.g., finding shade for cooling purposes, functional, e.g., shivering, structural, e.g., wings, arms races. Individuals and species must track their environments in ecological and evolutionary time, adapting and evolving as their environments change. Natural selection acting on natural enemies, prey, parasites, and predators will always result in a deterioration of an organism's biotic environment, diminishing fitness. Every pre-predator or host-parasite interaction constitutes an escalating arms race in which moves alternate with counter-moves. Prey that are better able to escape from their predators, or hosts that can better resist infection by parasites, will enjoy a fitness advantage. But better predators and better parasites are also favored by natural selection themselves, assuring that the arms race will continue to escalate indefinitely. Indeed, most species are probably evolving rapidly just to maintain a given current level of adaptation in the face of a continually deteriorating environment. Still, other interactions between species are mutually beneficial, resulting in increased fitness for both parties, such as between plants and their pollinators. Any genetically based physiological, behavioral, or ecological trait that enables an organism to cope with and to survive and reproduce in its environment represents an adaptation. Some traits may not be adaptive but simply leftover vestiges of traits that once were adaptive. A given trait can also be pre-adapted if it was formerly adaptive under some prior set of conditions now gone but is later co-opted as the basis of a new adaptation. Under some new environmental conditions, for instance, it once likely that bird feathers were initially important for temperature regulation rather than for flying. Institute for Advanced Studies, Job 107. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Adaptation versus adaptiveness. A trait being adaptive, i.e. increasing the organism's fitness, is neither a necessary nor sufficient condition for it to be an adaptation. Of course, an adaptation must have been adaptive at some point in an organism's evolutionary history, but such an organism's environment and ecological niche can change over time, leading to adaptations becoming redundant or even a hindrance maladaptions. Such adaptations are termed vestigial. Adaptation versus acclimation. Adaptation is also sometimes used to refer to a change in an individual organism over the course of its life that makes it more suited to the environment. For an example, see adaptation I. More specifically, however, such changes are referred to as acclimation or acclimatization, the former generally being a very short-term response such as shivering, the latter being a longer-term change such as suntanning. There is a great difference between selective adaptation and acclimatization. Adaptation occurs over many generations. It is a gradual process caused by natural selection. Acclimatization generally occurs within a single lifetime and copes with issues that are less threatening. For example, if a human was to move to a higher altitude, respiration and physical exertion would become a problem, but after spending time in high altitude conditions one may acclimate or acclimatize to the pressure and function and no longer notice the change. This ability to acclimate is an adaptation, but not the acclimatization itself. Theories. The theory of adaptation was first put forth by Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. His theories are also referred to as the inheritance of acquired traits. Lamarck's theory was for a time held as an alternative scientific explanation for evolutionary change observed by Darwin into the origin of species. The classic giraffe analogy offers the best delineation between the two. According to Darwin, more long-necked giraffes reproduce than short-necked giraffes, and as such giraffes today have long necks. According to Lamarck, it was giraffes stretching their necks in response to higher leaves that resulted in giraffes having long necks. This trait being passed on to the next generation. Although neither theory in its conception could provide a complete description of the mechanism of transmission of trait variation, i.e., particular inheritance, many recognize Darwin's theory immediately upon publication as a more complete and empirically supported theory. Modern genetics have since established the fundamental implausibility of Lamarckian inheritance due to the one-way nature of transcription. However, see epigenetics and Baldwinian evolution for analogous processes in modern evolutionary. 108 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. L. Digestive system, digestion, absorption, energy balance, BMR. Nutrient requirements. Animals must eat other organisms to stay alive. Since they derive their nutrition from other organisms, they are called heterotrophs. In contrast, autotrophs, most plants, some bacteria, and some protists trap solar energy through photosynthesis and use that energy to synthesize all of their components. Directly or indirectly, heterotrophs take advantage of, indeed, depend on, the organic synthesis carried out by autotrophs. Heterotrophs have evolved an enormous diversity of adaptations to exploit, directly or indirectly, the resources made available through the actions of autotrophs. In this section we will discover how animals use those resources as energy sources and as building blocks for complex molecules. Energy can be measured in calories. We learned that energy in the chemical bonds of food molecules is transferred to the high-energy phosphate bonds of ATP. ATP provides animals with energy for cellular work. Each conversion of energy from food molecules to ATP and from ATP to cellular work is inefficient. However, in fact, most of the energy that was in the food is lost as heat. Even the energy the animal uses is eventually reduced to heat, as molecules that were synthesized are broken down and the energy of movement is dissipated by friction. Therefore, we can talk about the energy requirements of animals and the energy content of food in terms of a measure of heat energy, the calorie. A calorie is the amount of heat necessary to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. Since this value is a tiny amount of energy compared with the energy requirements of many animals, physiologists commonly use a kilocalorie kcal as a unit of measure. 1 kilocalorie equals 1,000 calories. Nutritionists also use a kilocalorie as a standard unit of energy, but they traditionally refer to it as a calorie cal, which is always capitalized to distinguish it from a single calorie. Scientists are gradually abandoning the calorie as an energy unit as they switch to the international system of units. In this system, the basic unit of energy is a joule. 1 joule equals 0.239 calories. The metabolic rate of an animal is a measure of the overall energy needs that must be met by the animal's ingestion and digestion of food. The basal metabolic rate of a human is about 1,300 minus 1,500 kilocalories per day for an adult female and 1,600 minus 1,800 kilocalories per day for an adult male. Physical activity adds to this basal energy requirement. For a person doing sedentary work, about 30% of total energy consumption is due to skeletal muscle activity, and for a person doing heavy physical labor, 80% or more of total caloric expenditure is due to skeletal muscle activity. The components of food that provide energy are fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Fats yield 9.5 kilocalories per gram, carbohydrates 4.2 kilocalories per gram, and proteins about 4.1 kilocalories per gram. Energy budgets reveal how animals use their resources. It is possible, of course, to quantify the caloric value of any food an animal eats. It is also possible to quantify the caloric cost of anything an animal does. By comparing calories consumed with calories expended, it is possible to construct energy budgets for any set of circumstances. Energy budgets allow ecologists and evolutionists to apply a cost-benefit analysis to any behavior. Consider, for example, territorial aggression. Under what circumstances is it pay to fight over a food resource? Such a study was done on African sunbirds, which feed on the nectar of a particular flower. These birds defend feeding territories in some habitats, but not in others. Investigators hypothesized that the birds could afford to be territorial only if the food resource was rich enough to support the metabolic cost of aggressive behavior in addition to other essential activities. Accordingly, they determined how much nectar a flower produces and how this amount differs with habitat type. They then determined how many calories the birds spent when they were resting, when they were foraging, and when they were aggressively defending a patch of flowers. According to the investigators' calculations, if a bird had a choice between a patch of flowers that produced nectar at a rate of 1 place per day blossom or a patch that produced nectar at 2 place per day blossom, by selecting the richer patch, it could meet its daily caloric requirement with 4 hours of foraging instead of 8 hours of foraging. Since the caloric expenditure during foraging is 600 calories per hour greater than the caloric expenditure when resting, the bird could save 2,400 calories, 4 hours approximately 600 calories per hour by feeding on the more productive flowers. However, territorial defense costs 2,000 calories more per hour than foraging. Therefore, if a bird had to spend much more than an hour a day chasing intruders away from its rich flower patch, it would be better off being non-aggressive and feeding on the less productive flowers. Direct observation and measurement showed that the actual behavior of the birds agreed with these predictions based on energy budget calculations. Sources of energy can be stored in the body. Although the cells of the body use energy continuously, most animals do not eat continuously. Therefore, animals must store fuel molecules that can be released as needed between meals. Carbohydrates are stored in liver and muscle cells as glycogen, but the total glycogen store represents only about a day's basal energy requirements, 1,500 to 2,000 cal. Fat one's the most important form of stored energy in the bodies of animals. Not only does fat have more energy per gram than glycogen, but it can be stored with little associated water, making it more compact. Migrating birds store energy as fat to fuel their long flights. If they had to store the same amount of energy as glycogen, they would be too heavy to fly. Proteins are not used as energy storage compounds, although body. Institute for Advanced Studies, Job for 109. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Protein can be metabolized as an energy source of last resort. If an animal takes in too little food to meet its energy requirements, it is undernourished and must make up the shortfall by metabolizing some of the molecules of its own body. This consumption of self begins with the energy storage compounds glycogen and fat. Protein loss is minimized for as long as possible, but eventually a starving animal begins to break down its own proteins for fuel. The syndrome that results is called kwashiorkor. Blood proteins are among the first to be used, resulting in loss of fluid to the intercellular spaces, edema. Additional consequences of protein deficiency are breakdown of the immune system and degeneration of the liver. Muscles waste away, and eventually even brain protein is lost, leading to mental retardation. If starvation continues, the breakdown of body proteins eventually leads to death. Undernourishment is rampant among people in non-industrialized and war-torn nations, and a billion people, 1/6 of the world's population, are chronically undernourished. Ironically, one cause of life-threatening undernourishment in Western nations is a self-imposed starvation syndrome called anorexia nervosa that results from a psychological aversion to real or imagined body fat. When an animal consistently takes in more food than it needs to meet its energy requirements, it is overnourished. The excess nutrients are stored as increased body mass. First, glycogen reserves build up, then additional dietary carbohydrates, fats, and proteins are converted to body fat. In some species, such as hibernators, seasonal overnutrition is an important adaptation for surviving periods when food is not available. In humans, however, overnutrition can be a serious health hazard, increasing the risk of high blood pressure, heart attack, diabetes, and other disorders. Food provides carbon skeletons for biosynthesis. Every animal requires certain basic organic molecules that it cannot synthesize for itself, but needs as building blocks for its own complex organic molecules. An example of such a required carbon skeleton is the acetyl group. Animals cannot make acetyl groups from carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen molecules. They must obtain acetyl groups by metabolizing carbohydrates, fats, or proteins obtained by eating other organisms. Acetyl groups can be derived from the metabolism of almost any food. They are unlikely ever to be in short supply for an adequately nourished animal. Other carbon skeletons, however, are derived from more limited sources, and an animal can suffer a deficiency of these materials even if its caloric intake is adequate. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, are a good example of carbon skeletons that can be in short supply. Humans obtain amino acids by breaking down proteins from food. Another source of amino acids is the breakdown of existing body proteins, which are in constant turnover as the tissues of the body undergo normal remodeling and renewal. From all these amino acids, the body synthesizes its own protein molecules as specified by its DNA. Animals can synthesize some of their own amino acids by taking carbon skeletons synthesized from acetyl or other groups and transferring to them amino groups NH, derived from other amino acids. But most animals cannot synthesize all the amino acids they need. Each species has certain essential amino acids that it must obtain from food. Different species have different essential amino acids, and in general, herbivores have fewer essential amino acids than carnivores. If an animal does not take in enough of one of its essential amino acids, its protein synthesis is impaired. There are 8 essential amino acids that humans must obtain from their food: isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. All 8 are available in milk, eggs, meat, and soybean products, but most plant foods do not contain all 8. A strict vegetarian diet, therefore, poses a risk of protein malnutrition. A complementary dietary mixture of plant foods, however, supplies all 8 essential amino acids. In general, grains are complemented by legumes or by milk products. Legumes are complemented by grains, seeds, and nuts. Long before the chemical basis for this complementarity was understood, societies with little access to meat developed complementary diets. Many Central and South American peoples traditionally eat beans with corn, and the native peoples of North America complemented their beans with squash. Why are dietary proteins completely digested to the constituent amino acids before being used by the body? Wouldn't it be more energy efficient to reuse some dietary proteins directly? There are several reasons why ingested proteins are not used, as is, E macromolecules such as proteins are not readily absorbed by the cells of the gut, but their constituent monomers such as amino acids are readily absorbed. E protein structure and function are highly species specific. A protein that functions optimally in one species might not function well in another. E foreign proteins entering the body directly from the gut would be recognized as invaders and would be attacked by the immune system. Similarly, humans can synthesize almost all the lipids required by the body using acetyl groups obtained from food, but we must have a dietary source of certain essential fatty acids, notably linoleic acid, that we cannot synthesize. Linoleic acid is an unsaturated fatty acid needed by mammals to synthesize other unsaturated fatty acids, such as arachidonic acid, which is a component of several signaling molecules, including prostaglandins. A deficiency of linoleic acid can lead to problems such as infertility and impaired lactation. Essential fatty acids are also necessary components of membrane phospholipids. Animals need mineral elements for a variety of functions. The principal mineral elements that animals require are listed in Table 1. Elements required in large amounts are called macronutrients. Elements required in only tiny amounts are called micronutrients. Some micronutrients are required in such minute amounts that deficiencies are never observed, but they are nevertheless essential elements. 110 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Calcium is an example of a macronutrient. It is the 5th most abundant element in the body. A 70 kg person contains about 1.2 kilograms of calcium. Calcium phosphate is the principal structural material in bones and teeth. Muscle contraction, neuronal function, and many other intracellular functions in animals require calcium ions. The turnover of calcium in the extracellular fluid is high, as bones are constantly being remodeled and calcium is constantly entering and leaving cells. Calcium is lost from the body in urine, sweat, and feces, so it must be replaced regularly. Humans require about 800 to 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day in the diet. Iron is an example of a micronutrient. Iron is found everywhere in the body because it is the oxygen-binding atom in hemoglobin, and myoglobin is a component of enzymes in the electron transport chain. Nevertheless, the total amount of iron in a 70 kilogram person is only about 4 grams, and since iron is recycled so efficiently in the body and is not lost in the urine, we require only about 15 milligrams per day in our food. In spite of the small amount required, insufficient iron is the most common nutrient deficiency in the world today. 1 mineral elements required by animals. Element source in human diet major functions. Macronutrients calcium Ca. Grains, legumes, nuts. Chlorine Ci. Dairy foods. Magnesium Mg. Milk, legumes. Phosphorus P. Potassium K. Sodium Mna. Sulfur S meat, eggs, dairy foods, nuts, legumes. Micronutrients. Chromium crossing. Cowbell coat meat, tap water. Copper coat liver, meat, fish, shellfish, legumes, whole grains, nuts. Fluorine F most water supplies. Toadine eye fish, shellfish, iodized salt. Iron bait liver, meat, green vegetables, eggs, whole. Grains, legumes, nuts. Manganese Mn. Tea, coffee. Molybdenum Mo organ meats, dairy, whole grains, green vegetables, legumes. Selenium Say. Table salt knuckle meat, eggs, vegetables, green vegetables, meat, whole grains, nuts. Meat, whole grains, fruits, vegetables. Meat, dairy, whole grains, legumes, yeast. Organ meats, whole grains, legumes, nuts. Dairy foods, eggs, green leafy vegetables, whole found in bones and teeth, blood clotting, nerve. And muscle action, enzyme activation. Water balance, digestion as HCI principle. Negative ion in tissue fluid. Required by many enzymes, found in bones. And teeth, dairy, eggs, meat, whole grains, legumes, nuts still found in nucleic acids, ATF, and phospholipids. Bone formation, buffers, metabolism of sugars. Nerve and muscle action, protein synthesis, principal positive ion in cells. Table salt, dairy foods, meat, eggs, vegetables, nerve and muscle action, water balance. Principal positive ion in tissue fluid. Found in proteins and coenzymes, detoxification of harmful substances. Glucose metabolism. Found in vitamin B, formation of red blood cells, found in active site of many redox enzymes and electron carriers, production of hemoglobin, bone formation. Found in teeth, helps prevent decay, found in thyroid hormones. Found in active sites of many redox enzymes and electron carriers, hemoglobin and myoglobin. Activates many enzymes. Found in some enzymes. Meat, seafood, whole grains, eggs, milk, garlic till the fat metabolism. Zinc, Z and liver, fish, shellfish, and many other foods found in some enzymes and some transcription. Factors, insulin physiology. Animals must obtain vitamins from food. Another group of essential nutrients is the vitamins. Like essential amino acids and fatty acids, vitamins are carbon compounds that an animal requires for its normal growth and metabolism, but cannot synthesize for itself. Most vitamins function as coenzymes or parts of coenzymes and are required in very small amounts, compared with the essential amino acids and fatty acids, which have structural roles. The list of vitamins varies from species to species. Most mammals, for example, can make their own ascorbic acid, vitamin C. However, primates, including humans, do not have this ability, so for primates, ascorbic acid is a vitamin. If we do not get vitamin C in our food, we develop a disease known as scurvy, characterized by bleeding gums, loss of teeth, subcutaneous hemorrhages, and slow wound healing. Scurvy was a serious and frequently fatal problem for sailors on long voyages until a Scottish physician, James Lind, discovered that the disease could be prevented if the sailors ate fresh greens or fresh fruit. Eventually, the British Admiralty made lime standard provisions for its ships, and ever since, British sailors have been called limeys. The active ingredient in limes was named ascorbic without scurvy acid. Humans require 13 vitamins. Table 2 lists these vitamins, their dietary sources, and their functions. They are divided into two groups, water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. When water-soluble vitamins are ingested in excess of bodily needs, they are simply eliminated in the urine. This is the fate of much of the vitamin C that people take in excessive doses. The fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, however, can accumulate in body fat and may build up to toxic levels in the liver if taken in excess. Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur 111. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. 2 vitamins in the human diet. Vitamin source function deficiency symptoms water-soluble. B, thiamine. B, riboflavin. Niacin. B, pyridoxine. Pantothenic acid. Biotin. B, cobalamin. Folic acid. C, ascorbic acid liver, legumes, whole grains. Dairy, meat, eggs. Green leafy vegetables. Meat, fowl, liver, yeast. Coenzyme in cellular respiration. Coenzyme in FAD. Coenzyme in NAD and NADP. Liver, whole grains, dairy foods, coenzyme in amino acid. Liver, eggs, yeast. Liver, yeast, bacteria in gut. Liver, meat, dairy foods, eggs. Vegetables, eggs, liver, whole grains. Metabolism. Found in acetyl-CoA. Found in coenzymes. Formation of nucleic acids, proteins, and red blood cells. Coenzyme in formation of heme nucleotides. Citrus fruits, tomatoes, potatoes formation of connective tissues, antioxidant. Beriberi, loss of appetite, fatigue. Lesions in corners of mouth. Eye irritation, skin disorders. Pellagra, skin disorders. Diarrhea, mental disorders, anemia, slow growth, skin problems, convulsions, adrenal problems, reproductive problems. Skin problems, loss of hair, pernicious anemia. Anemia. Scurvy, slow healing, poor bone. Fat soluble. A, retinol. D, calciferol fruits, vegetables, liver, dairy. E, tocopherol. K, menadione intestinal bacteria, liver. Found in visual pigments. Fortified milk, fish oils, sunshine absorption, Ca and phosphate rickets. Growth. Night blindness. Meat, dairy foods, whole grains, muscle maintenance, antioxidant, anemia. Blood clotting problems. The fat-soluble vitamin D, calciferol, which is essential for the absorption and metabolism of calcium, is a special case because the body can make it. Certain lipids present in the human body can be converted into vitamin D by the action of ultraviolet light on the skin. Thus, vitamin D must be obtained in the diet only by individuals with inadequate exposure to the sun, such as people who live in cold climates where clothing usually covers most of the body and where the sun may not shine for long periods of time. The need for vitamin D may have been an important factor in the evolution of skin color. Human races that are adapted to equatorial and low latitudes have dark skin pigmentation as a protection against the damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. These peoples generally expose extensive areas of skin to the sun on a regular basis, so their skin synthesizes adequate amounts of vitamin D. Most human races that became adapted to higher latitudes lost this dark skin pigmentation. Presumably, lighter skin facilitates vitamin D production in the relatively small areas of skin exposed to sunlight during the short days of winter. An exception to this correlation between latitude and skin pigmentation is the Inuit peoples of the Arctic. These dark-skinned people obtain plenty of vitamin D from the large amounts of meat and fish oils in their diet. For them, exposure to sunlight is not necessary for obtaining this vitamin. Nutrient deficiencies result in diseases. The lack of any essential nutrient in the diet produces a state of deficiency called malnutrition, and chronic malnutrition leads to a characteristic deficiency disease. An example: 1 kwashiorkor, the disease that results from protein deficiency. A shortage of any of the vitamins also results in specific deficiency symptoms. See table 2. We have already described scurvy, which results from a lack of vitamin C. Another deficiency disease, beriberi, was directly involved in the discovery of vitamins. Beriberi means extreme weakness. It became prevalent in Asia in the 19th century, after it became standard practice to mill rice to a high, white polish and discard the hulls that are present in brown rice. A critical observation was that birds, chickens and pigeons, developed beriberi-like symptoms when fed only polished rice. In 1912, Casimir Funk cured pigeons of beriberi by feeding them the discarded hulls. At the time of Funk's discovery, all diseases were thought to be either caused by microorganisms or inherited. Funk suggested the radical idea that beriberi and some other diseases are dietary in origin and result from deficiencies in specific substances. Funk coined the term vitamines because he mistakenly thought that all these substances were amines, compounds with amino groups vital for life. In 1926, thiamine, vitamin B1, the substance lost in the rice milling process, was the first vitamin to be isolated in pure form. Deficiency diseases can also result from an inability to absorb or process an essential nutrient even if it is present in the diet. Vitamin B12, cobalamin, for example, is present in all foods of animal origin. Since plants neither use nor produce vitamin B12, a strictly vegetarian diet not supplemented by vitamin pills can lead to a B12 deficiency disease called pernicious anemia, characterized by a failure of red blood cells to mature. The most common cause of Pernicious anemia, however, is not a lack of vitamin B12 in the diet, but an inability to absorb it. Normally, cells in the stomach lining secrete a peptide called intrinsic factor, which binds to vitamin B12 and makes it possible for it to be absorbed in the small intestine. Conditions that damage the stomach lining can therefore cause pernicious anemia. Inadequate mineral nutrition can also lead to deficiency diseases. Lodine, for example, is a constituent of the hormone thyroxine, which is produced in the thyroid. 112 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal Gland. If there is insufficient iodine in the diet, the thyroid gland grows larger in an attempt to compensate for inadequate production of thyroxine. The swelling of the neck that results is called a goiter. The introduction of iodized table salt has greatly reduced the incidence of goiter in the United States. Adaptations for feeding. Heterotrophic organisms can be classified by how they acquire their nutrition. Saprobes, also called saprotrophs, are decomposers or organisms, mostly protists and fungi, that absorb nutrients from dead organic matter. Detritivores, such as earthworms and crabs, actively feed on dead organic material. Animals that feed on living organisms are predators. Herbivores prey on plants, carnivores prey on animals, and omnivores prey on both. Filter feeders, such as clams and blue whales, prey on small organisms by filtering them from the aquatic environment. Fluid feeders include mosquitoes, aphids, and leeches, as well as birds, such as hummingbirds that feed on plant nectar. The anatomical adaptations that enable a species to exploit a particular source of nutrition are usually quite obvious, but physiological and biochemical adaptations can be just as important. The food of herbivores is often low in energy and hard to digest. Most vegetation is coarse and difficult to break down physically, but herbivores must process large amounts of it, since its energy content is low. Most herbivores spend a great deal of their time feeding. Many have striking adaptations for feeding, such as the trunk, a flexible, gripping nose of the elephant, or the long neck of the giraffe. Many types of grinding, rasping, cutting, and shredding mouthparts have evolved in invertebrates for ingesting plant material, and the teeth of herbivorous vertebrates have been shaped by selection to process coarse plant matter. The digestive processes of herbivores can also be quite specialized, as we will see below. Carnivores must detect, capture, and kill prey. The predatory behaviors of many carnivores are legendary. One need only call to mind the hunting skills. 1 mammalian teeth. A mammalian tooth has 3 layers: enamel, dentine, and pulp cavity. The teeth of different mammalian species are specialized for different diets. A hard material called enamel, composed principally of calcium phosphate, covers the tooth. Of hawks, wolves, or tigers, carnivores have evolved stealth, speed, power, large jaws, sharp teeth, and strong gripping appendages. Carnivores also have evolved remarkable means of detecting prey. Bats use echolocation. Pit vipers sense infrared radiation from the warm bodies of their prey, and certain fishes detect electric fields created in the water by their prey. Adaptations for killing and ingesting prey are diverse and highly specialized. These adaptations can be especially important when the prey are capable of inflicting damage on the predator. A snake may strike with poisonous fangs, using its venom to immobilize it before ingesting it. To swallow large prey, a snake disengages its lower jaw from its joint with the skull. The tentacles of jellyfishes, the long, sticky tongues of chameleons, and the webs of spiders are other fascinating examples of adaptations for capturing and immobilizing prey. Some predators digest their prey externally. For example, a spider may inject its insect prey with digestive enzymes and then suck out the liquefied contents, leaving behind the empty exoskeletons frequently seen in old spider webs. Vertebrate species have distinctive teeth. Teeth are adapted for the acquisition and initial processing of specific types of foods. Because they are one of the hardest structures of the body, an animal's teeth remain in the environment long after it dies. Paleontologists use teeth to identify animals that lived in the distant past and to deduce what their feeding behavior might have been. All mammalian teeth have the same general structure, consisting of 3 layers. Figula, an extremely hard material called enamel, composed principally of calcium phosphate, covers the crown of the tooth. Both the crown and the root contain a layer of bony material called dentine, inside of which is a pulp cavity containing blood vessels, nerves, and the cells that produce the dentine. The shapes and organization of mammalian teeth, however, can be very different, since they are adapted to specific diets. Figure 1b. In general, incisors are used for cutting, chopping, or gnawing. Canines are used for stabbing, ripping, and shredding, and molars and premolars, the cheek teeth, are used for shearing, crushing, and grinding. The highly varied diet of humans is reflected by our multi-purpose set of teeth, as one as common among omnivores. Beak, lower jaw, top view. Crown. Both the crown and the root contain a layer of bony material called beak equals dentine. Gums 0 tilde. Within which is a pulp. Root cavity containing blood, vessels, nerves, and the cells that produce the dentine. B. Cement bone nerves and periodontal. Holds tooth, blood vessels, membrane. In bone. Omnivore, herbivore. 0 T human 2 equals R underscore L underscore 1 foot L cheek JI 1 foot AII I 3 J. Omnivores have I multipropose YII. Set of teeth percent II B4 I carnivore A9 CCAFT I. Carnivores have greatly percent I enlarged canine teeth KW. For gripping, killing B1L. And tearing G their prey PREY ESYFYM. Canines used for ripping. L herbivores use their incisors and canines, which are found far forward on the lower jaw, only to tear leaves off of plants. And tearing. Incisors for cutting. B premolars for shearing. O molars for grinding. Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur 113. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal Digestion. Most animals digest their food extracellularly. That is, animals take food into a body cavity that is continuous with the outside environment, into which they secrete digestive enzymes. The enzymes act on the food, reducing it to nutrient molecules that can be absorbed by the cells lining the cavity. The simplest digestive systems are gastrovascular cavities, which connect to the outside world through a single opening. Cnidarians, for example, capture prey using their stinging nematocysts and cram it into their gastrovascular cavity with their tentacles. Enzymes in the gastrovascular cavity partly digest the prey. Cells lining the cavity take in small food particles by endocytosis. The vesicles created by endocytosis then fuse with lysosomes containing digestive enzymes, and intracellular digestion completes the breakdown of the food. Nutrients are released to the cytoplasm as the vesicle breaks down. Tubular guts have an opening at each end. The guts of most animals are tubular. A mouth takes in food. Molecules are digested and absorbed throughout the length of the gut, and solid digestive wastes are excreted through an anus. Different regions in the tubular gut are specialized for particular functions. Figure 2. These functions must be coordinated so that they occur in the proper sequence and at appropriate rates to maximize the efficiency of digestion and absorption of nutrients. At the anterior end of the gut of the mouth, the opening itself and the mouth cavity. Food may be broken up by teeth in some vertebrates, by the medulla in snails, or by mandibles in insects. In earthworms and most birds, a muscular portion of the gut called the gizzard grinds the food together with small stones. Some animals, such as snakes, simply ingest large chunks of food with little or no fragmentation. Stomachs and crops are storage chambers that enable animals to ingest relatively large amounts of food and digest it later. In these storage chambers, food may be further fragmented and mixed, but digestion may or may not occur there, depending on the species. In any case, food delivered into the next section of the gut, the midgut or intestine, is well minced and well mixed. Most nutrients, water, and ions are absorbed in the midgut. To digest food materials, specialized glands secrete some digestive enzymes into the midgut, and the gut wall itself secretes other enzymes. The hindgut recovers water and ions and stores undigested wastes, or feces, so that they can be released to the environment at an appropriate time or place. A muscular rectum near the anus assists in the expulsion of feces. Within the hindguts of many species are colonies of endosymbiotic bacteria. These bacteria obtain their own nutrition from the food passing through the host's gut while contributing to the digestive processes of the host. Members of the leech genus Hirudo, for example, produce no enzymes that can digest the proteins in the blood they suck from vertebrates. A colony of gut bacteria produces the enzymes necessary to break down those proteins into amino acids, which are subsequently used by both the leech and the bacteria. Earthworm. Mouth, crop, intestine, esophagus, crop, gizzard. Mandible, S. salivary, intestine. Glands. Rabbit. Salivary, pancreas. Glands equals cecum. Teeth. Small. Intestine. Esophagus, liver, stomach, large intestine. Two compartments for digestion and absorption. Most animals have tubular guts that begin with a mouth, which takes in food, and end in an anus, which eliminates wastes. Between these two structures are specialized regions for digestion and nutrient absorption. The structures in these regions vary from species to species. Some animals, including humans, rely on microorganisms in their guts to supply them with vitamins. In many animals, the parts of the gut that absorb nutrients have evolved extensive surface areas, figure 3a, b. In vertebrates, the wall of the gut is richly folded, with the individual folds bearing legions of tiny finger-like projections called villi, figure 3c. The cells that line the surfaces of the villi, in turn, have microscopic projections, called microvilli. The microvilli give the gut an enormous internal surface area for the absorption of nutrients. Digestive enzymes break down complex food molecules. Protein, carbohydrate, and fat macromolecules are broken down into their simplest monomeric units by hydrolytic enzymes. All of these enzymes cleave the chemical bonds of macromolecules through hydrolysis, a reaction that adds a water molecule, see figure 3.3b. Digestive enzymes are classified according to the substances they hydrolyze. Proteases break the bonds between adjacent amino acids in proteins. Carbohydrates hydrolyze carbohydrates. 114 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Peptidases, peptides, lipases, fats, and nucleases, nucleic acids. The prefixes exo outside and endo within indicate where the enzyme cleaves the molecule. An endoprotease hydrolyzes a protein at an internal site along the polypeptide chain, and an exoprotease snips away amino acids at the ends of the molecule. How can an organism produce enzymes that hydrolyze biological macromolecules without digesting itself? Most digestive enzymes are produced in an inactive form, known as a zymogen, so that they cannot act on the cells that produce them. When secreted into the gut, zymogens are generally activated by another enzyme, as we will explain below. The lining of the gut is not digested because it is protected by a covering of mucus. I7 Earthworm by shark. Earthworms, Hadia T, and testine sharks have evolved a SEPID wall. Longitudinal infolding, T, ZGFL __, valve that increases TAF the intestinal wall. Infolding _ surfo MMTR painteslm, J, cent human. IF morose for teller atesh, and an arndles, and the folding of LTS lining. H engine increase the, dotted micro cab IEs LTLHE bill, vastly. Surface area of these folds. Absorptive sur KFSA x sur IED bed by increasing the absorb sur TFAC IED ray, the shear length of the tubular T small intestine. Y microvilli, 4. Epithelial. Capillary cells. 3 greater intestinal surface area means more nutrient absorption. The guts of most animals have solved to maximize their surface area. 4 tissue layers of the vertebrate gut in all compartments of the gut. The organization of the tissue layers is the same, but special structure and function of the vertebrate gut K_1 word equals E is adaptations of specific tissues characterize different regions. The digestive tract of vertebrates is a tubular gut that runs from mouth to anus. The vertebrate gut can be divided into several compartments that are specialized. Y. The serosa is the membranous covering of the abdominal cent for different digestive and absorptive functions. In its continui OTHUTC kerato that NLE and USMTHE abdomen addition, several accessory structures produce compounds that contribute to the digestive process and J. Release them into the gut. Nerve. Blood vessel. The pancreas empties into intestine. The vertebrate gut has 4 tissue layers. The cellular architecture of the vertebrate gut follows a common plan throughout its length. 4 major layers of different cell types form the wall of the gut, figure 4. These layers differ somewhat from compartment to compartment, but they are always present. Starting in the nerve cavity, or lumen, of the gut, the first tissue layer is the mucosa mucosa. Mucosal cells have secretory and absorptive functions. Some secrete mucus, which lubricates and protects the walls of the gut. Others secrete digestive enzymes, and still others secrete hormones. Mucosal cells in the stomach secrete hydrochloric acid, HCl. In circular regions of the gut, nutrients are absorbed by muscle layer mucosal cells. The plasma membranes of these absorptive cells have many folds that increase their surface area. See figure 3c. Seroia. Lymph node. Submucosa. Submucosal pain or net2. SU-GL. Longitudinal muscle layers. Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur 115. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. At the base of the mucosa are some smooth muscle cells. And just outside the mucosa is a second tissue layer, the submucosa. Here we find the blood and lymph vessels that carry absorbed nutrients to the rest of the body. The submucosa also contains a network of nerves. The neurons in this network are both sensory, responsible for stomach aches, and regulatory, controlling the various secretory functions of the gut. External to the submucosa are 2 layers of smooth muscle tissue responsible for the movements of the gut. Innermost is a circular muscle layer, with its cells oriented around the gut. Outermost is a longitudinal muscle layer, with its cells oriented along the length of the gut. The circular muscles constrict the gut, and the longitudinal muscles shorten it. Between the 2 layers of smooth muscle is another network of nerves, which controls and coordinates the movements of the gut. The coordinated activity of the 2 smooth muscle layers moves the gut contents continuously toward the rectum. Surrounding the gut is a coat of fibrous tissue called the serosa. Like other abdominal organs, the gut is also covered and supported by a tissue called the peritoneum. Mechanical activity moves food through the gut and aids digestion. And swallowing. Brainstem reflex center and nerves controlling swallowing. Windpipe. Esophagus, flat. I. The soft fillet T square pulled up as the vocal cords close the larynx. LJ fayad is chewed and the tongue pushes the bolus of food to the back of the mouth. Sensory nerves initiate the swallowing reflex. The larynx is pulled up and forward and is covered by the epiglottis. The esophageal sphincter relaxes. The bolus of food enters the esophagus. In most vertebrates, including humans, food entering the mouth is chewed and mixed with saliva. A muscular tongue then pushes a chunk, or bolus, of chewed food toward the back of the mouth cavity. By making contact with the soft palate at the back of the throat, the bolus of food initiates swallowing, which is a complex series of autonomic reflexes. If you stand in front of a mirror and gently touch this tissue at the back of your throat with a cotton swab, you will experience an uncontrollable urge to swallow. Swallowing propels the food through the pharynx, where the mouth cavity and the nasal passages join, and into the esophagus, the food tube. To prevent the food from entering the trachea windpipe, the larynx voice box closes, and a flap of tissue called the epiglottis covers the entrance to the trachea, figure 5. Once the food is in the esophagus, a wave of smooth muscle contraction, called peristalsis, takes over and pushes it toward the stomach. The smooth muscle layers of the gut contract in response to being stretched. Swallowing a bolus of food stretches the upper end of the esophagus, and this stretching initiates a wave of contraction that moves progressively down the gut from the pharynx toward the anus. B. Peristalsis. Food bolus, esophagus, circular muscles, contract. Previous bolus. Circular muscles relax. Longitudinal muscles. Contract. Pyloric. Sphincter. I. Peristaltic contractions propel the food to the stomach. 5. Swallowing and peristalsis, food push to the back of the mouth triggers the swallowing reflex. Once food enters the esophagus, peristalsis propels it through the gut. The movement of food from the stomach into the esophagus 1 is normally prevented by the eloesophageal sphincter, a thick ring of circular smooth muscle at the junction of the esophagus and the stomach. This sphincter is normally constricted, but waves of peristalsis cause it to relax enough to let food pass from the esophagus into the stomach. Sphincter muscles are found elsewhere in the digestive tract as well. The pyloric sphincter governs the passage of stomach contents into the intestine. Another important sphincter surrounds the anus. Chemical digestion begins in the mouth and the stomach. The enzyme amylase is secreted by the salivary glands and mixed with food as it is chewed. Amylase hydrolyzes the bonds between the glucose monomers that make up starch molecules. The action of amylase is what makes a chewed piece of bread or cracker taste slightly sweet if you hold it in your mouth long enough. Most vertebrates can rapidly consume a large volume of food, but digesting that food is a slower process. The stomach stores the consumed food until it can be digested. The secretions of the stomach kill microorganisms that are taken in with the food and begin the digestion of proteins. The major enzyme produced by the stomach is an endopeptidase called pepsin. Pepsin is secreted as a zymogen called pepsinogen by cells in the gastric glands that are deep folds in the stomach lining, figure 6. Other cells in the gastric glands produce hydrochloric acid, and still others near the openings of the gastric glands and throughout the stomach mucosa secrete mucus. 116 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. 6. The stomach of the human stomach stores and breaks down ingested food. Beet cells in the gastric glands secrete hydroxychlorotic acid and pepsin, both the gastric glands and the gastric mucosa. Secrete mucus that protect THC stomach. At stomach. Lower. Esophageal sphincter. Hydrochloric acid HCl maintains the stomach fluid, the gastric juice, at a pH between 1 and 3. This extremely low pH activates the conversion of pepsinogen to pepsin and provides the right pH for pepsin's enzymatic action. The pepsinogen molecule is activated by the cleavage of a masking sequence of 44 amino acids from the N-terminal end, exposing the pepsin active site, figure 7. The newly formed pepsin activates other pepsinogen molecules in a positive feedback process called autocatalysis. Hydrochloric acid also helps dissolve the intercellular substances holding the ingested tissues together. The breakdown of these tissues exposes more food surface area to the action of pepsin and, eventually, other digestive enzymes in the small intestine. Inactive zymogen. Pepsinogen. Active enzyme, pepsin. A masking sequence is cleaved from the sequence _ pepsinogen molecule into the active digestive enzyme pepsin. 7. Activating a zymogen low pH in the stomach stimulates cleavage of a masking sequence of amino acids, transforming the Y-mobile pepsinogen into the active digestive enzyme pepsin. Pepsin itself also activates pepsinogen through autocatalysis. Mucus secreted by the stomach mucosa coats the walls of the stomach and protects them from being eroded and digested by HCl and pepsin. Sometimes, however, the walls of the stomach are exposed, and the resulting damage is called an ulcer. It was once thought that ulcers were caused by stress and oversecretion of digestive juices. However, it turns out that the basis for most ulcers is an infectious bacterium called Helicobacter pylori, which has the remarkable ability to live in the highly acidic environment of the stomach. Damage to the stomach lining initiated by the bacterial infection is made worse by HCl and pepsin. Contractions of the smooth muscles in the walls of the stomach churn its contents, thoroughly mixing them with the stomach secretions. The acidic, fluid mixture of gastric juice and partly digested food in the stomach is called chyme. A few substances can be absorbed from the chyme across the stomach wall, including alcohol, hence its rapid effects. Aspirin and caffeine, but even these substances are absorbed in rather small quantities in the stomach, masking transforming pepsinogen. B in a process called allocatalysis. Newly formed pepsin activates other pepsinogen molecules, low pH. C converts pepsinogen to pepsin. Gastric gland. Peristaltic contractions of the stomach walls push the chyme toward the bottom end of the stomach. These waves of peristalsis cause the pyloric sphincter to relax briefly so that little squirts of the chyme can enter the small intestine. In this manner, the human stomach empties itself gradually over a period of approximately 4 hours. This slow introduction of food into the small intestine enables the small intestine to work on a little material at a time. Most chemical digestion occurs in the small intestine. In the small intestine, the digestion of carbohydrates and proteins continues, and the digestion of fats and the absorption of nutrients begin. The small intestine takes its name from its diameter. It is in fact a very large organ, about 3 meters long in an adult. Because of its length, and because of the folds, villi, and microvilli of its lining, its inner surface area is enormous, about 550 meters, or roughly the size of a tennis court. Across this surface, the small intestine absorbs all the nutrient molecules derived from food. The small intestine has 3 sections. The initial section, about 25 centimeters, called the duodenum, is the site of most digestion. The jejunum and the ileum, together about 270 centimeters, carry out 90% of the absorption of nutrients. Digestion in the small intestine requires many specialized enzymes, as well as several other secretions. 2 accessory organs that are not part of the digestive tract, the liver and the pancreas, provide many of these enzymes and secretions. Liver. The liver synthesizes bile from cholesterol. Bile secreted from the liver flows through the hepatic duct to the duodenum and through a side branch of the hepatic duct to the gallbladder, figure 8, where it is stored until it is needed to assist in fat digestion. When fat enters the duodenum, a hormonal signal causes the walls of the gallbladder to contract rhythmically, squeezing bile out of the gallbladder and into the hepatic duct. Below the branch to the gallbladder, the hepatic duct is called the common bile duct. Bile from the gallbladder flows down the common bile duct to the duodenum. To understand the role of bile in fat digestion, think of an oil and vinegar salad dressing. The oil, which is hydrophobic, tends to aggregate in large globules. For that reason, many salad dressings include an emulsifier, something that prevents oil droplets from aggregating. Mayonnaise, for example, is oil and vinegar with egg. Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur 117. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Yolk added as an emulsifier. Bile emulsifies fats in the chyme, and thereby greatly enlarges the surface area of the fats exposed to the lipases, the enzymes that digest fats. The liver produces bile. Common. Bile duct. G. S. Single quote. Duodenum. The pancreas produces digestive enzymes and bicarbonate solution. 8. The ducts of the gallbladder and pancreas bile produced in the liver leaves the liver via the hepatic duct. The pancreas is a large gland that lies just beneath the stomach, see figure 8. It functions as both an endocrine gland secreting hormones to the blood and tissue fluid, and an exocrine. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. L. Digestive system, digestion, absorption, energy balance, BMR. Nutrient requirements. Animals must eat other organisms to stay alive. Since they derive their nutrition from other organisms, they are called heterotrophs. In contrast, autotrophs, most plants, some bacteria, and some protists trap solar energy through photosynthesis and use that energy to synthesize all of their components. Directly or indirectly, heterotrophs take advantage of, indeed, depend on, the organic synthesis carried out by autotrophs. Heterotrophs have evolved an enormous diversity of adaptations to exploit, directly or indirectly, the resources made available through the actions of autotrophs. In this section we will discover how animals use those resources as energy sources and as building blocks for complex molecules. Energy can be measured in calories. We learned that energy in the chemical bonds of food molecules is transferred to the high-energy phosphate bonds of ATP. ATP provides animals with energy for cellular work. Each conversion of energy from food molecules to ATP and from ATP to cellular work is not efficient. However, in fact, most of the energy that was in the food is lost as heat. Even the energy the animal uses is eventually reduced to heat, as molecules that were synthesized are broken down and the energy of movement is dissipated by friction. Therefore, we can talk about the energy requirements of animals and the energy content of food in terms of a measure of heat energy, the calorie. A calorie is the amount of heat necessary to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. Since this value is a tiny amount of energy compared with the energy requirements of many animals, physiologists commonly use the kilocalorie kcal as a unit of measure. 1 kilocalorie equals 1,000 calories. Nutritionists also use the kilocalorie as a standard unit of energy, but they traditionally refer to it as a calorie cal, which is always capitalized to distinguish it from a single calorie. Scientists are gradually abandoning the calorie as an energy unit as they switch to the international system of units. In this system, the basic unit of energy is a joule. 1 joule equals 0.239 calories. The metabolic rate of an animal is a measure of the overall energy needs that must be met by the animal's ingestion and digestion of food. The basal metabolic rate of a human is about 1,300 minus 1,500 kilocalories per day for an adult female and 1,600 minus 1,800 kilocalories per day for an adult male. Physical activity adds to this basal energy requirement. For a person doing sedentary work, about 30% of total energy consumption is due to skeletal muscle activity, and for a person doing heavy physical labor, 80% or more of total caloric expenditure is due to skeletal muscle activity. The components of food that provide energy are fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Fats yield 9.5 kilocalories per gram, carbohydrates 4.2 kilocalories per gram, and proteins about 4.1 kilocalories per gram. Energy budgets reveal how animals use their resources. It is possible, of course, to quantify the caloric value of any food an animal eats. It is also possible to quantify the caloric cost of anything an animal does. By comparing calories consumed with calories expended, it is possible to construct energy budgets for any set of circumstances. Energy budgets allow ecologists and evolutionists to apply a cost-benefit analysis to any behavior. Consider, for example, territorial aggression. Under what circumstances is it pay to fight over a food resource? Such a study was done on African sunbirds, which feed on the nectar of a particular flower. These birds defend feeding territories in some habitats, but not in others. Investigators hypothesized that the birds could afford to be territorial only if the food resource was rich enough to support the metabolic cost of aggressive behavior in addition to other essential activities. Accordingly, they determined how much nectar a flower produces and how this amount differs with habitat type. They then determined how many calories the birds spent when they were resting, when they were foraging, and when they were aggressively defending a patch of flowers. According to the investigators' calculations, if a bird had a choice between a patch of flowers that produced nectar at a rate of 1 place per day blossom or a patch that produced nectar at 2 places per day blossom, by selecting the richer patch, it could meet its daily caloric requirement with 4 hours of foraging instead of 8 hours of foraging. Since the caloric expenditure during foraging is 600 calories per hour greater than the caloric expenditure when resting, the bird could save 2,400 calories, 4 hours approximately 600 calories per hour by feeding on the more productive flowers. However, territorial defense costs 2,000 calories more per hour than foraging. Therefore, if a bird had to spend much more than an hour a day chasing intruders away from its rich flower patch, it would be better off being non-aggressive and feeding on the less productive flowers. Direct observation and measurement showed that the actual behavior of the birds agreed with these predictions based on energy budget calculations. Sources of energy can be stored in the body. Although the cells of the body use energy continuously, most animals do not eat continuously. Therefore, animals must store fuel molecules that can be released as needed between meals. Carbohydrates are stored in liver and muscle cells as glycogen, but the total glycogen store represents only about a day's basal energy requirements, 1,500 to 2,000 cal. Fat one's the most important form of stored energy in the bodies of animals. Not only does fat have more energy per gram than glycogen, but it can be stored with little associated water, making it more compact. Migrating birds store energy as fat to fuel their long flights. If they had to store the same amount of energy as glycogen, they would be too heavy to fly. Proteins are not used as energy storage compounds, although body. Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur 109. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Protein can be metabolized as an energy source of last resort. If an animal takes in too little food to meet its energy requirements, it is undernourished and must make up the shortfall by metabolizing some of the molecules of its own body. This consumption of self begins with the energy storage compounds glycogen and fat. Protein loss is minimized for as long as possible, but eventually a starving animal begins to break down its own proteins for fuel. The syndrome that results is called kwashiorkor. Blood proteins are among the first to be used, resulting in loss of fluid to the intercellular spaces, edema. Additional consequences of protein deficiency are breakdown of the immune system and degeneration of the liver. Muscles waste away, and additional consequences of protein deficiency are breakdown of the immune system and degeneration of the liver. Muscles waste away, and eventually even brain protein is lost, leading to mental retardation. If starvation continues, the breakdown of body proteins eventually leads to death. Undernourishment is rampant among people in non-industrialized and war-torn nations, and 1 billion people, 1/6 of the world's population, are chronically undernourished. Ironically, one cause of life-threatening undernourishment in Western nations is a self-imposed starvation syndrome called anorexia nervosa that results from a psychological aversion to real or imagined body fat. When an animal consistently takes in more food than it needs to meet its energy requirements, it is overnourished. The excess nutrients are stored as increased body mass. First, glycogen reserves build up, then additional dietary carbohydrates, fats, and proteins are converted to body fat. In some species, such as hibernators, seasonal overnutrition is an important adaptation for surviving periods when food is not available. In humans, however, overnutrition can be a serious health hazard, increasing the risk of high blood pressure, heart attack, diabetes, and other disorders. Food provides carbon skeletons for biosynthesis. Every animal requires certain basic organic molecules that it cannot synthesize for itself, but needs as building blocks for its own complex organic molecules. An example of such a required carbon skeleton is the acetyl group. Animals cannot make acetyl groups from carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen molecules. They must obtain acetyl groups by metabolizing carbohydrates, fats, or proteins obtained by eating other organisms. Acetyl groups can be derived from the metabolism of almost any food. They are unlikely ever to be in short supply for an adequately nourished animal. Other carbon skeletons, however, are derived from more limited sources, and an animal can suffer a deficiency of these materials even if its caloric intake is adequate. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, are a good example of carbon skeletons that can be in short supply. Humans obtain amino acids by breaking down proteins from food. Another source of amino acids is the breakdown of existing body proteins, which are in constant turnover as the tissues of the body undergo normal remodeling and renewal. From all these amino acids, the body synthesizes its own protein molecules as specified by its DNA. Animals can synthesize some of their own amino acids by taking carbon skeletons synthesized from acetyl or other groups and transferring to them amino groups NH, derived from other amino acids. But most animals cannot synthesize all the amino acids they need. Each species has certain essential amino acids that it must obtain from food. Different species have different essential amino acids, and in general, herbivores have fewer essential amino acids than carnivores. If an animal does not take in enough of one of its essential amino acids, its protein synthesis is impaired. There are 8 essential amino acids that humans must obtain from their food: isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. All 8 are available in milk, eggs, meat, and soybean products, but most plant foods do not contain all 8. A strict vegetarian diet, therefore, poses a risk of protein malnutrition. A complementary dietary mixture of plant foods, however, supplies all 8 essential amino acids. In general, grains are complemented by legumes or by milk products. Legumes are complemented by grains, seeds, and nuts. Long before the chemical basis for this complementarity was understood, societies with little access to meat developed complementary diets. Many Central and South American peoples traditionally eat beans with corn, and the native peoples of North America complemented their beans with squash. Why are dietary proteins completely digested to their constituent amino acids before being used by the body? Wouldn't it be more energy efficient to reuse some dietary proteins directly? There are several reasons why ingested proteins are not used, as is, macromolecules such as proteins are not readily absorbed by the cells of the gut, but their constituent monomers such as amino acids are readily absorbed. Protein structure and function are highly species specific. A protein that functions optimally in one species might not function well in another. Foreign proteins entering the body directly from the gut would be recognized as invaders and would be attacked by the immune system. Similarly, humans can synthesize almost all the lipids required by the body using acetyl groups obtained from food, but we must have a dietary source of certain essential fatty acids, notably linoleic acid, that we cannot synthesize. Linoleic acid is an unsaturated fatty acid needed by mammals to synthesize other unsaturated fatty acids, such as arachidonic acid, which is a component of several signaling molecules, including prostaglandins. A deficiency of linoleic acid can lead to problems such as infertility and impaired lactation. Essential fatty acids are also necessary components of membrane phospholipids. Animals need mineral elements for a variety of functions. The principal mineral elements that animals require are listed in Table 1. Elements required in large amounts are called macronutrients. Elements required in only tiny amounts are called micronutrients. Some micronutrients are required in such minute amounts that deficiencies are never observed, but they are nevertheless essential elements. 110 Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. Calcium is an example of a macronutrient. It is the 5th most abundant element in the body. A 70 kg person contains about 1.2 kilograms of calcium. Calcium phosphate is the principal structural material in bones and teeth. Muscle contraction, neuronal function, and many other intracellular functions in animals require calcium ions. The turnover of calcium in the extracellular fluid is high, as bones are constantly being remodeled and calcium is constantly entering and leaving cells. Calcium is lost from the body in urine, sweat, and feces, so it must be replaced regularly. Humans require about 800 to 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day in the diet. Iron is an example of a micronutrient. Iron is found everywhere in the body because it is the oxygen binding atom in hemoglobin and myoglobin and is a component of enzymes in the electron transport chain. Nevertheless, the total amount of iron in a 70 kilogram person is only about 4 grams, and since iron is recycled so efficiently in the body and is not lost in the urine, we require only about 15 milligrams per day in our food. In spite of the small amount required, insufficient iron is the most common nutrient deficiency in the world today. 1 mineral elements required by animals. Element source in human diet major functions. Macronutrients calcium Ca. Grains, legumes, nuts. Chlorine Ci. Dairy foods. Magnesium Mg. Milk, legumes. Phosphorus P. Potassium K. Sodium Mna. Sulfur S meat, eggs, dairy foods, nuts, legumes. Micronutrients. Chromium crossing. Cowbell coat meat, tap water. Copper coat liver, meat, fish, shellfish, legumes, whole grains, nuts. Fluorine F most water supplies. Todine I fish, shellfish, iodized salt. Iron bait liver, meat, green vegetables, eggs, whole. Grains, legumes, nuts. Manganese Mn. Tea, coffee. Molybdenum Mo organ meats, dairy, whole grains, green vegetables, legumes. Selenium Say. Table salt knuckle meat, eggs, vegetables, green vegetables, meat, whole grains, nuts. Meat, whole grains, fruits, vegetables. Meat, dairy, whole grains, legumes, yeast. Organ meats, whole grains, legumes, nuts. Dairy foods, eggs, green leafy vegetables, whole found in bones and teeth, blood clotting, nerve. And muscle action, enzyme activation. Water balance, digestion as HCI principle. Negative ion in tissue fluid. Required by many enzymes, found in bones. And teeth, dairy, eggs, meat, whole grains, legumes, nuts still found in nucleic acids, ATF, and phospholipids. Bone formation, buffers, metabolism of sugars. Nerve and muscle action, protein synthesis, principal positive ion in cells. Table salt, dairy foods, meat, eggs, vegetables, nerve and muscle action, water balance. Principal positive ion in tissue fluid. Found in proteins and coenzymes, detoxification of harmful substances. Glucose metabolism. Found in vitamin B, formation of red blood cells found in active site of many redox enzymes and electron carriers, production of hemoglobin, bone formation. Found in teeth, helps prevent decay found in thyroid hormones. Found in active sites of many redox enzymes and electron carriers, hemoglobin and myoglobin. Activates many enzymes. Found in some enzymes. Meat, seafood, whole grains, eggs, milk, garlic tilde fat metabolism. Zinc, Z and liver, fish, shellfish, and many other foods found in some enzymes and some transcription. Factors, insulin physiology. Animals must obtain vitamins from food. Another group of essential nutrients is the vitamins. Like essential amino acids and fatty acids, vitamins are carbon compounds that an animal requires for its normal growth and metabolism, but cannot synthesize for itself. Most vitamins function as coenzymes or parts of coenzymes and are required in very small amounts, compared with the essential amino acids and fatty acids, which have structural roles. The list of vitamins varies from species to species. Most mammals, for example, can make their own ascorbic acid, vitamin C. However, primates including humans do not have this ability, so for primates, ascorbic acid is a vitamin. If we do not get vitamin C in our food, we develop a disease known as scurvy, characterized by bleeding gums, loss of teeth, subcutaneous hemorrhages, and slow wound healing. Scurvy was a serious and frequently fatal problem for sailors on long voyages until a Scottish physician, James Lind, discovered that the disease could be prevented if the sailors ate fresh grains or fresh fruit. Eventually, the British Admiralty made line standard provisions like essential amino acids and fatty acids. Another group of essential nutrients is the vitamins. Like essential amino acids and fatty acids, vitamins are carbon compounds that an animal requires for its normal growth and metabolism, but cannot synthesize for itself. Most vitamins function as coenzymes or parts of coenzymes and are required in very small amounts, compared with the essential amino acids and fatty acids, which have structural roles. The list of vitamins varies from species to species. Most mammals, for example, can make their own ascorbic acid, vitamin C. However, primates including humans do not have this ability, so for primates, ascorbic acid is a vitamin. If we do not get vitamin C in our food, we develop a disease known as scurvy, characterized by bleeding gums, loss of teeth, subcutaneous hemorrhages, and slow wound healing. Scurvy was a serious and frequently fatal problem for sailors on long voyages until a Scottish physician, James Lind, Scurvy was a serious and frequently fatal problem for sailors on long voyages until a Scottish physician, James Lind, discovered that the disease could be prevented if the sailors ate fresh grains or fresh fruit. Eventually, the British Admiralty made line standard provisions for its ships, and ever since, British sailors have been called linies. The active ingredient in lines was named ascorbic without scurvy acid. Humans require 13 vitamins. Table 2 lists these vitamins, their dietary sources, and their functions. They are divided into two groups, water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. When water-soluble vitamins are ingested in excess of bodily needs, they are simply eliminated in the urine. This is the fate of much of the vitamin C that people take in excessive doses. The fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, however, can accumulate in body fat and may build up to toxic levels in the liver if taken in excess. Institute for Advanced Studies, Jodhpur 111. Unit 7 System Physiology Animal. 2 vitamins in the human diet. Vitamin source function deficiency symptoms water soluble. B. Thiamine. B. Riboflavin. Niacin. B. Pyridoxine. Pantothenic acid. Biotin. B. Cobalamin. Folic acid. C. Ascorbic acid liver, legumes, whole grains. Dairy, meat, eggs. Green leafy vegetables. Meat, fowl, liver, yeast. Coenzyme in cellular respiration. Coenzyme in FAD. Coenzyme in NAD and NADP. Liver, whole grains, dairy foods coenzyme in amino acid. Liver, eggs, yeast. Liver, yeast, bacteria in gut. Liver, meat, dairy foods, eggs. Vegetables, eggs, liver, whole grains. Metabolism. Found in acetyl-CoA. Found in coenzymes. Formation of nucleic acids, proteins, and red blood cells. Coenzyme in formation of heme nucleotides. Citrus fruits, tomatoes, potatoes formation of connective tissues, antioxidant. Beriberi, loss of appetite, fatigue. Lesions in corners of mouth. Eye irritation, skin disorders. Pellagra, skin disorders. Diarrhea, mental disorders, anemia, slow growth, skin problems, convulsions, adrenal problems, reproductive problems. Skin problems, loss of hair, pernicious anemia. Anemia. Scurvy, slow healing, poor bone. Fat soluble. A. Retinol. D. Calciferol fruits, vegetables, liver, dairy. E. Tocopherol. K. Menadione intestinal bacteria, liver. Found in visual pigments. Fortified milk, fish oils, sunshine absorption Ca and phosphate rickets. Growth. Night blindness. Meat, dairy foods, whole grains, muscle maintenance, antioxidant anemia. Blood clotting problems. The fat-soluble vitamin D calciferol, which is essential for the absorption and metabolism of calcium, is a special case because the body can make it. Certain lipids present in the human body can be converted into vitamin D by the action of ultraviolet light on the skin. Thus, vitamin D must be obtained in the diet only by individuals with inadequate exposure to the sun, such as people who live in cold climates where clothing usually covers most of the body and where the sun may not shine for long periods of time. The need for vitamin D may have been an important factor in the evolution of skin color. Human races that are adapted to equatorial and low latitudes have dark skin pigmentation as a protection against the damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. These peoples generally expose extensive areas of skin to the sun on a